What's up, everybody? Welcome to Mid-Ice Crisis, inaugural episode. I'm Josh Cybulski, be your host for this ride. I'm excited to get back into some hockey broadcasting. I might not be a familiar face, but I have been a hockey broadcaster for the better part of 20 years, off and on. I've been a hockey writer for 3 years now, and it's a completely different animal. I've kind of closed the book on my broadcasting career. I got awful close to getting to where I wanted to, but I think in this day and age, this is as good as it gets for me. So I'm very excited to bring you this show. Mid-Ice Crisis is just going to be me ranting and raving about how I'm going through a midlife crisis and how it relates to hockey. I'm completely kidding about that. It is a show that I'm excited to bring you. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. I want to get into a lot of the cultural issues in hockey, as well as the on-ice stuff. Certainly transactions that exist, what's going on with the NHL, which, by the way, the NHL feels very different this year than it has in previous years. So we'll talk about that. But excited to bring you the show. Little background on me. I'm a hockey writer, right? I do host another podcast as well with a good buddy of mine, Corey Leckie, called Second Story, which is more of a personal development one. But I've been in the podcasting space for a few years now, so not exactly new to the whole thing. So let's get into things. That's a little on me. By the way, I have busted ass hips that I'll talk to you about a lot. I was a goalie in my youth, and I pretty much destroyed my body, so we'll talk about that. All right, let's start it off with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who, full transparency, are my favorite team. In case you couldn't tell, what I got a couple books over there. I got Mario, a little bit of the Penguins, The Room. Look at you got right up there, little Pittsburgh Penguins sign. Yeah. So I am biased when it comes to the Penguins. However, I got to be honest, I think they're too good this year. And I say that as they've started the season on an absolute tear. They're sitting in second place as we record today. Sitting in second place in the division, I should say. And, they started to cool off. Last 3 games, they've actually been terrible in all 3 games, and they're still picking up points. And that is troubling if you are a Penguins fan that is hoping for the tank this year, if you want to tank for the top prospect, Gavin McKenna. So for the Penguins in that spot where they're too good, they are stuck in this weird place where they're kind of in the middle. I don't know that they're necessarily a playoff team. This could all be a mirage. Maybe they're not really that good. But to start the year, they've been rolling. And they still have the oldest team in the NHL. They still have Sidney Crosby, who's 38. They still have Evgeny Malkin, who's 39. Chris Letang is also 38. Those are old men by hockey terms. But for Crosby and Malkin, they're both playing great. And the Penguins have been in this rebuild now, or at least they finally started to call it a rebuild, where they've gotten young players. They've made a lot of really smooth draft picks, especially this past year. And they're finally in a spot where they've got young players coming to play in the NHL, but they still have all these old guys. So what do they really do? They're in, again, a tough spot because you don't exactly want to mortgage the future to just win this year. But you also have to tell these guys who are at the end of their career and may only have one more shot to make it to the playoffs that, hey, we're not going to sell the farm just to be good for 1 year. So if you're general manager Kyle Dubas, what do? You're in a spot where you're talking about guys' legacies. Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin. These are legacy players, first ballot Hall of Famers, who for Malkin, this is the last year of his contract. He may never play in the NHL again, let alone have an opportunity to actually make the playoffs. So I find this situation, although obviously I'm a fan of the Penguins, I find this to be a very fascinating situation that's happening in Pittsburgh. And it's one of the early season stories. And it's finally starting to get coverage. Like, what do they really do? Because a month ago, nobody thought the Penguins would be any good, let alone starting the year the way that they have. And it's finally starting to get noticed because people have sort of shut up about the trade Sidney Crosby. That's gone away, right? A month ago, everyone was like, Crosby should get traded here. He should get traded there. He should want to get traded. Shit, his agent was like putting pressure on the Pittsburgh Penguins to trade him. He was going on, media appearances, and he's like essentially pressuring the team to trade him. But you have to give credit where it's due to Kyle Dubas, who's the general manager of the Penguins. he gets a lot of hate, I think, specifically because he came from the Toronto Maple Leafs. And everybody loves to hate the Toronto Maple Leafs, myself included. He had a lot of ridiculous names coming up. Boy Wonder was one of them. That's what they always called him. He was the Wonder Kid. All these different silly things. But it didn't go all that well in Toronto. Toronto was always a playoff team. But a lot of people were very critical of what Dubas did in Toronto, saying he never, built a good team around them, which I think is all wrong. I think it was just a case of a bunch of players who couldn't execute when it mattered, in the playoffs. But for the Penguins, he's come in, and his first month in Pittsburgh was an absolute disaster. He signed Tristan Jarry long-term. He signed Ryan Graves long-term. Ryan Graves is making $4.5 million and doesn't even play in the NHL anymore. Tristan Jarry makes $5.25 or close to $5.25 a year. And for long stretches has not even been an NHL goaltender. So the first summer, he also made the Erik Karlsson trade, which I still think was a good trade, but a lot of people do not like it. So that first summer was a disaster in Pittsburgh. And then they were not a good team for the next 6 or 7 months to start the season. And then all of a sudden they pivoted to a rebuild in Pittsburgh. They traded Jake Gensel at the deadline, which essentially signaled to their fans, we're finally turning the corner and we're going to go young. But then they started winning again, and they almost made the playoffs by accident. And then the next year, they went through the same thing. They were shitty again. They spent the summer not really making any moves, just signing depth guys to one-year deals. And they sort of knew they weren't going to be very good. And then they were accidentally kind of good for a while again. And it's always this recurring thing where Dubas has these plans to go young or make an actual rebuild for the Penguins, and then they're better than expected. And then everybody goes, oh, should he change his plans and yada, yada. Anyways, the Penguins are really in a spot now. So this has been going on for the better part of 2.5 years. Now they're really in a place. They've brought up Ben Kindell. They've brought up Harrison Brunick. 2 young guys, 18, 19-year-olds, weren't expected to play in the NHL. Now they are. Now they're actually good NHLers. And for the Penguins, they have a bunch of veterans too, making a lot of money that they had planned to trade. And now it's like, well, we're winning. Can we really trade these guys? And for Kyle Dubas, who has always wanted to rebuild for the better part of 2 years, can he really do that now? And I think this is a really tough situation that the Penguins are in. Obviously, you're happy to be good, but when you sort of had a plan that, hey, we're going to be terrible and you're accidentally good, it's a weird place to be in. So I don't know what the Penguins are going to do. I'm very interested to see where this all goes, but it's kind of like life. You make these plans in life of where things are going to go, and then it never works out that way. It always, life always has other plans. So I think looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins, that's sort of what's happened here. A lot of players have been better than expected, but we're early in the season. We're like 10% of the way through the year. They always say, make your assessment by American Thanksgiving. So that's only a few weeks away. We're going to see what actually happens. All right, now I'm going to stick with the Penguins for a little bit. I want to pivot over to what Sidney Crosby has been able to do this year. Now, I won't go into the exact figures, but, Sidney Crosby's been a point-a-game player for 20 years. And once again, to start the year, we're early in the season, and he has started out, you guessed it, as a point-a-game player. And it really makes you wonder, how long is this guy going to keep this up? I mentioned legacy earlier. Obviously, his legacy's set in stone. He could retire today, and he's maybe a top 5 player of all time. I'd make an argument he's probably top 5. So it's a pretty interesting thing. Then you have, the guy that was his arch rival for a long, long time. They haven't really been so lately, but Alex Ovechkin, who last year, of course, set the goal-scoring record. He's also still good at 40. So you've got these 2 generational superstars who I think are probably the last of their kind. So Crosby and Ovechkin. Ovechkin last year, of course, went on a tear. He's still a point-a-game player. Guy had 44 goals last year. Crosby, of course, I think he had 91 points, 92 points last year. So again, just unbelievable. But Ovechkin he's started the season a little bit slow. He's got 7 points in his first 10 games, and only 2 of them are goals. Now, for a guy who's historically always scored between 40 and 60 goals, that's obviously a slow start to the year. He started slow last year too. So I'm not exactly sure that there's cause for concern there. But what I do think when I say that Crosby and Ovechkin to me are the last of their kind, I think you are looking at a future in the NHL where the generational superstars that come in, I don't think that they're going to be able to have a prime in their career that was as long as Crosby and Ovechkin's. You look at Crosby, who is really not that far off from the way he played when he was like 27 years old. And you look at Ovechkin, who, again, 73 points last year, still a point-a-game player. He's not putting up 100 points like he used to when he was 24. But, I mean, when the guy was 29, he would put up 80 points. Last year, he's pretty close to 80 points. So these guys really haven't tailed off all that much. Now, I think with Crosby and Ovechkin, they both have very unique skill sets that allow them to age gracefully, so to speak. So for Ovechkin, the dude literally stands in one place and just blasts the puck. So he might be able to do that till he's 50, just stand in place. I mean, I'm sure his shoulders are going to fail at some point, but to just be able to do that, now I'm not downplaying how big of a skill that is. Everybody knows where he's going to shoot the puck from, and he's done it for 20 seasons, and no one's been able to stop it. And even when they try to stop it, he steps 3 steps to the left and just does the same shit. But the reason I think that players are going to see their prime shrink, and I don't think you're going to see so many players who can be this elite to the 38, 39, 40, is that the new generation of superstars relies so much more on speed than Crosby and Ovechkin ever did. Now, that's not to say that Crosby and Ovechkin were slow. It's just they didn't have this reliance on being fast because they were both high IQ hockey players. And I'm not saying that like the new generation of superstars is a bunch of dummies, because they're really not. But I think that what Crosby and Ovechkin had was just this higher degree of hockey sense, higher degree of hockey IQ. Sidney Crosby is probably the smartest player who's ever played the game. Maybe Gretzky would be an argument as a better player, but I don't think Mario Lemieux had a hockey IQ as high as Sid's. I really don't. Terrific player, obviously like one of the best ever. But Lemieux's first passion wasn't even hockey. His first passion was smoking cigs. Maybe not that. It was golf. But he loved smoking cigs too. You certainly wouldn't find Sid smoking cigs. Now, one of the things too, just to point out the next level of superstars that we have going on, analytics obviously play a big part in hockey now, and there's this real pivot towards, and this has been going on for a long time, so this is nothing new, but team systems. Teams are not necessarily as built around one player as they used to be. Now, there are still teams that do this. Edmonton, for example, they still have Connor McDavid. They also have Leon Draisaitl, and they've really built the team around those two guys. They don't have any cups to show for it yet, so who's to say whether it works or it doesn't? But you look at the Florida Panthers, they're not built around one guy. Although they have some very elite players, obviously, in Kachuk and Barkov and, Ekblad, and you can go on down the list, Carter Verhaeghe. They are what you would call a full team. They play a team system, and that's the way they've built the club, right? So what I'm getting at is I don't know necessarily that the NHL is going to see teams assemble one or two guys the way that, Crosby and Malcolm were put together and try to just build around those two guys and actually win. Because I don't know that necessarily is an effective model anymore. People are going to say, well, Edmonton's close and, they could do it, and Pittsburgh did it. But I don't really believe that Pittsburgh did it. If you look back at the years they won the Cup versus the years they didn't. The years they won the Cup, 16, 17, 2009, in 16-17, it was Crosby, it was Malkin, but they had Phil Kessel, greatest human being alive except for my wife and kids. President Phil. They had him. They still had Letang as well. They had elite level goaltending. So it wasn't really just like having a superstar and just building your team around them. It wasn't an effective model. And I really don't think going forward in the NHL with all of the systems and analytics that teams have access to, that model is actually viable. I still think you're going to have a generational superstar. There's a few of them still in the NHL. I just don't think that building specifically around those players is going to be the model. I think you need to shift to this, we have this superstar, but we also have a deep team rather than trying to build around one guy. Teams are still going to try to develop them. They're still going to try to draft them. That's what Gavin McKenna is. That's why everybody wanted the Penguins to tank this year. So I do see this as being something that is going to change. And how does that impact long term? I just don't see the future superstars of this league, the way that they're built, the way, what their skill sets are. Speed is something it generally is the first thing you lose. So if you are a superstar built on speed, which is Connor McDavid is the fastest player ever with the puck. I just don't know how he's going to age. I could be totally wrong about this in 10 years and he's just flying around the ice at 38. But to me, when he does start to lose steps, I think you're going to see a real drop in his play and in his abilities and things like that. So only time will tell us if I'm completely out to lunch. But I think, again, you're going to see the window in which superstars are elite shrink. They might still be elite till 35, 36. But I feel like Crosby and Ovechkin are kind of the last of their kind. And, even going back, Gretzky was not this level of play at 38. Post 35 years old, it's just not something that you really ever see. Oh, got a dog in the shot. Just to kind of close on this point, just to throw it back to life. In your life, you're not going to rely on just any one thing. And I think for superstars, if it's a superstar who relies on speed, I don't think they're going to age as gracefully as some of the older superstars have. But something, too, that comes up all the time, I hear people talking about this, and I've I've thought about this a lot, but you are starting to see some of the guys who are not elite level talents, but very good NHL players and very good NHL scorers, their careers are ending a lot earlier than maybe perhaps they used to. Even this past summer, there were a lot of good NHL players who just couldn't get contracts and ended up having to go over to Europe. Not necessarily all scorers, but Calvin DeHaan comes to mind as a good player who had to leave to continue playing. He's just not doing it in the NHL. And there's lots of guys like that. So I think we are going to start seeing shorter primes as hockey evolves. So I want to jump over and talk about everybody's favorite punching bag, and that is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Again, we're early in the NHL season. I don't want to read too much into what's going on in Toronto, but something does not look right with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I don't think it's crazy to say that. They're obviously dealing with a lot of stuff. I look at that dressing room and I wonder, what would it be like to just be a fly on the wall in that room? So William Nylander is playing hurt to start the year. Been their best player by far, I think. Obviously leading the team in scoring to start the year. But I think the Leafs are starting to have a bit of an Austin Matthews problem. And when I say that, I couldn't tell you exactly what the problem is, but Austin Matthews has not looked like Austin Matthews for, I'd say, close to a year. He didn't look like Austin Matthews last year. He has not looked like Austin Matthews thus far this year. And I'm probably going to catch some shit for that. But I do think it's true. You look at his numbers from last year. So keep in mind that 2 years ago, this is a guy, and again, I know he was hurt last year, and I'll touch on that in a second. 2 years ago, this guy had 69 goals. 69. Right? We're children. 69 goals in 81 games. Last year, 67 games, 33 goals. So basically, he averaged 0.5 goals a game. And he was pretty close to a goal a game the year before. Now, you could contribute that to a lot of things. Yes, he was injured last year. Obviously, a big problem. The amount of shots that he took dropped by 108. That is a significant number of shots. Now, you often hear NHL goal scorers who will say that if the puck's not going in for them, they're not worried. They only become worried when they don't get the chances. So then they stop getting chances. Now, in the case of Matthews, I get it. He played 14 less games last year. But still, to have 108 less shots in 14 games, he wasn't taking 10 shots a game. You know what I mean? So substantial, fairly substantial margin. So that's one thing I look at, and that's obviously a cause for concern. Now, again, he was injured last year quite a bit. But to start this year, he's got 5 goals in his first 11 games. Now, is that the end of the world? No, it's still 0.5 goals a game. Well, pretty close to it. It's a little bit under. But that's the margin with which he was scoring last year. So is that a cause for concern? Well, last year it was at 0.5. So this year, theoretically, it should be too, right? It's around the same number. So does that mean this guy's not going to be a 60 goal scorer anymore? I don't know. I really don't know. It sure looks like it. And if you look at his game right now, he does not look like the Austin Matthews of old. Now, I just did a whole segment, 7 minutes. We'll call it a segment. I just did, 10 minutes on how I feel like the prime of NHL superstars is going to shrink. And for Austin Matthews, he's 28 years old now. He is reaching what we used to call the prime of a player's career. Some people say 26 to 32. Some people say 27 to 33. There's all different ranges depending on who you talk to. But it's safe to say that Austin Matthews should still be in the prime of his career. But he's certainly not playing as though he's in the prime of his career. And that's, if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, that is troubling because you just watched arguably your best player walk away this summer. Or I guess he got traded. But he left. Mitch Marner, obviously, who's a lightning rod in Toronto. So Mitch Marner left. And you wonder how much Mitch Marner's leaving has taken a toll on Austin Matthews. It's always tough to lose a superstar off your team. Doesn't matter what team you are. Watching a superstar walk away is difficult. It's even more difficult for the superstar who's left there, who now gets more of the attention on the ice as well as off of it. People used to scrutinize Mitch Marner. He was a lightning rod. He was a punching bag in Toronto, which is ironic because he's from Toronto, but he was the punching bag. People would show up at his house. Somebody doxed him last year. He had to hire security. He was the punching bag. He was always the reason a lot of the time. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, a lot of people are looking at this and they're going, oh, it was Matthews all along. Matthews was the problem all along. I see a lot of that online. And personally, I've always kind of felt that if I was going to trade in Toronto, if I was going to trade any of their 3 superstars, so Nylander, Marner, or Matthews, I was always like, I would have traded Matthews personally. That's just how I always felt. Now, the thing about Marner is he hasn't exactly had a great start by his own numbers in Vegas. I mean, he's still distributing the puck very well. He's got 12 points in 10 games. Only 2 of them goals, though. Now, he's not notoriously known for being a goal scorer. His career high is 35. So he's a setup man. He's not the trigger man. He's the guy setting up the trigger man. But still, you look at his game, and to start the year, he's been good enough. Some of his underlying numbers, there's quite a few of them that are actually better than they were in Toronto. Now, can the same be said for Austin Matthews in Toronto? The answer is no. He has, to start the year at least, again, it's only 10% of the way through the season. But his numbers just aren't there this year. Underlying numbers or traditional statistics. So do I think that the Toronto Maple Leafs need to be concerned about that? Maybe. Unless they know something we don't. If they know he's playing through an injury, which is very possible, that would be an issue that they'd know that they may or may not have concern about. If it's a minor thing, maybe it's a nagging thing, you don't really know. But I'm going to throw something out there that's going to give me a lot of shit when people hear it. If anybody ever watches this show, they'll be like, oh, you're trying to stoke something here or trying to rage bait people. And I really am not. I genuinely do believe this. But last year we watched the Vancouver Canucks have this massive rift in their dressing room between Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. And I posted this video a couple weeks ago, or I guess it was last week, of Matthews and William Nylander celebrating an overtime goal. And in the immediate aftermath of scoring the goal, they like hug each other, they celebrate, they do the whole thing. It was like an emotional moment because, of course, they just won the game in overtime. People are excited about it. But then it got weird. And if you watch the video, I did post a second part to it on, all my social media stuff. You watch the second part of it, they just kind of stand there awkwardly. And they're not really looking at each other. And Nylander side eyes Matthews a couple times. Maybe there's nothing there. But it does seem that there's something in that room that's going on. Now, there's also, you had Anthony Stolarz, the Leafs goaltender, not quite throw Nylander under the bus, but essentially, critique without actually saying his name. Saying, we got to be there. Talk about Nylander needing to back check, essentially. And I don't know what the rift is in Toronto, but it certainly seems like something's going on in that dressing room where there's some animosity between people. I don't know if it's Matthews. I don't know if it's Nylander. I don't know if it's Stolarz. I don't know if it's anybody. I don't know that it exists, but I wonder as the season goes on, if there is something, is it like a thread where you just start to pull on it and things unravel? Because that's what happened in Vancouver last year. People forget, but the Canucks came into last season with like Stanley Cup expectations and they missed the playoffs. So it can happen, You think about a bad relationship. I'm sure everybody listening, both of you, have probably had one at some point in time. And it can make other parts of your life very difficult. And if you're a hockey team who's supposed to be a cohesive unit, you start to have this problem, in your personal space, your dressing room, all that kind of thing. It can spill over onto the ice and, create all kinds of issues, trust issues, issues with, getting frustrated with each other, angry. You did see some of that in the playoffs between Nylander and Matthews last year, where basically Nylander said to Matthews, and I'll paraphrase, like, stop being a baby. It's basically what he said. So I don't know if there's anything there. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I think, you look at Austin Matthews' game and you look at where his numbers are at, his underlying numbers, and there is something up. Injury, personal feelings, maybe he's just not playing inspired hockey. But I don't know. There is something going on that is kind of beneath the surface. Will it get revealed over the season? I'm not entirely sure, but there was an article this week in Leafs Nation about how essentially Austin Matthews had to defend his own compete level. And when you are having to defend your effort level, then that's not a great look. That was in a post game. I think it was against the Columbus Blue Jackets where he had to do that. But yeah, he wasn't talking specifically about himself. He was talking about his team's effort level because they had lost the game. And they had given up a lot of goals off the rush. And, there's really only a handful of reasons why you give up rush goals. One of them is somebody makes a bad pinch, gets caught, somebody falls down, gets stuck, whatever it happens to be. Or people just don't get back. So you give up a lot of goals off the rush. It's either one of those things. If you're last year's Pittsburgh Penguins, it was bad pinches. If you're this year's Toronto Maple Leafs, maybe it's a combo. Maybe it's just the effort level. But Austin Matthews said, I don't think it's an effort thing. I think the guys work hard. I think we compete. And he also made comments that he thinks they found a new identity. Now, people in life will often find a new identity. And just because you find a new one doesn't mean it's a better one. So for the Leafs, I don't know. They definitely have a new identity because they don't have Mitch Marner anymore. But is that a better thing or a worse thing? We'll see. We will see in time. All right. So I want to talk just about the show in general here. As we evolve this thing, Mid-Ice Crisis, I would certainly like to open the door to folks being able to have their voices heard, pitch us their questions. We are going to have a final segment on the show called the Crisis Hotline. That segment will allow listeners to send their questions via social media, email, whatever you would like. You could certainly submit a story if you have one about your own mid-ice crisis. Maybe you were drafted the NHL and you became a draft bust. Maybe you coached and got fired. Maybe you had some type of a meltdown. I wanted to share a meltdown of my own, and this could be called my midlife crisis, or I guess mid-ice crisis, I should say. My midlife crisis, I already had that years ago. I'm too old. So obviously we'll get into questions when we actually have an audience to ask them. But so for me, going back to my hockey playing days, I can remember times. So in Ontario, back in the day, oftentimes you'd play in a league with folks from Quebec, and there might be several Quebec teams that you would go play against. I'm not so sure that this happens anymore because a lot of the Quebec leagues have kind of stuck to Quebec and Ontario sticks to Ontario. But so years ago, we're playing this little teeny tiny village by the name of Chapeau, Quebec. And we had a real rivalry with these folks. Their arena, this is, I guess, how old I am or what the town was like, but their arena did not have glass. They had chicken wire instead of glass. And if you don't believe me, I still have videos of playing there. So we're playing them in the playoffs, first round of the playoffs. And this is one of the last years I ever played hockey. We get trounced in the first game, like 10-3. I give up 10 goals. I think I faced like 70 shots, so I had a good effort. So we had a home game, which we lost. We go in, it's a best of 3. We go into Chapeau, and the whole town is out in Chapeau. We're down 1-0 in the series. Go into the game. Game starts. First play of the game, the puck comes to me. I'm like 15, 20 feet out of my crease. I go to wire it around the glass, forgetting that it's not glass. It hits the chicken wire and bounces straight in front of me, right to a player on Chapeau, who now has an open net, and I look like Alex Nedeljkovic 2 weeks ago in overtime. Guy just skates it to the net as I'm chasing him to the net. So good start. We're like 20 seconds into the game. I give up this goal. My buddy/cousin comes over to me and he goes, what are the chances of that happening? And I'm like, yeah, it was a bit of a fluke or whatever. Not even 5 minutes later, he goes to wire one off the glass, which is not glass, bounces to the front of the net, right in the slot. Guy's there. Boom, 2-0. Game goes on. We end up losing 6-1. Fun times. We're out of the playoffs. We go into the dressing room. The walk to the dressing room, they didn't actually have pads or mats, like the rubber mats that you see in most arenas. They had little squares. So you actually had to jump from square to square. Boom, 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 boom. And all of Chapeau, all 400 people who live in this little village, or however many it is, they're all yelling at us, screaming at us. So we get into the room. Everybody starts packing up on the team. Good year, blah, blah, blah. By the way, we won 2 games the whole year, that team. Everybody made the playoffs back then. We were pretty bad. Anyways, season ends. My cousin and I are sitting there in the dressing room. My cousin goes, I have a stink bomb. I go, what? He goes, I have a stink bomb. I'm like, where? He's like, in my bag. And we could hear them in their room celebrating the big playoff win. We walk out of our room with our equipment. I take my goalie stick. I prop the door open a little bit of their dressing room. My cousin just, with his finger, flicks in this stink bomb. I let the door close, and we just walk away. And all you hear is, like all this yelling. And we laughed, and we laughed. And we laughed. And then we drove home. The next year in the playoffs, we had to play them again. We were on a different team, still my cousin and I. Different team, we get to the playoffs. This time, literally the whole town's out at the game. Probably like, 1,000 people maybe. The entire arena is jam full. As I'm walking to the ice, again, they still have pads, so you're like jumping from place to place to place. My cousin and I are the first 2 in our team's line. And some guy in the crowd who's like standing there yelling at me spits at us He spits at us. And I look at my cousin and I'm like, are we gonna have to fight this guy? And the guy's like, he's very French. He's like, do you remember me from last year? And we're like, no. He's like, I remember you and your stink bombs. And we're like, oh no. Oh no. So we go out into the ice, and the whole time we're doing warm-ups, this guy is like mean mugging us from the sidelines. And then he leaves the arena and he walks. I could see him walking like through the lobby. And my cousin's like, he's going to go stink bomb all of our stuff to get us back. And I'm like, yeah, he probably is. So the whole time, like, paying attention to this. Anyways, first 2 shots of the game I let in, and we end up losing 2-1. And I had like an absolute meltdown the first, because I'm just looking over my shoulder, making sure this guy's not going to go stink bomb me. We ended up winning the series, though. But there was a lesson to be learned in there as a 14-year-old child stink bombing people. That was the last stink bomb we ever threw. But it was a fun little hockey story to live. Anyways, I'd love to hear from you, hear your questions, hear your stories. Happy to share them on the air. That's obviously a clean hockey story. Unfortunately, hockey culture has changed dramatically, and kids are no longer stink bombing each other. But we'll talk about that on the show, where the culture has kind of led, which I don't personally love. My kids are not in hockey, and I literally just said to my wife, I hope they never are. I love the game. I don't love the culture, and we'll get into that on this show. Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in. Appreciate you. Thanks, Corey, for producing. Again, it's Corey Leckie. We have another show, Second Story. If you're into personal development, definitely recommend it. Second Story podcast. So thanks so much, Corey. And thanks so much to the sponsor of the show, Quench Hydration. Get your quench. Go over to quenchhydration.ca/Second Story Pod. Get yourself 15% off any of their products. And trust me, this stuff rips. Have yourselves a good one. Thanks so much.